Hello everyone. Today I'll be going through the basics of the biology of language acquisition as well as a little bit about Chomsky's theory on language acquisition. Do keep in mind that this video doesn't contain every single detail about these topics. I've removed some stuff and I've added a little bit of extra information just for fun. And one more thing, I am not a licensed teacher. I don't have any teaching certifications, so don't rely on this video as your primary source of information. You can use this as sort of a revision guide if you wish, but without further ado, let us commence. So firstly, let's talk language centers. What are language centers? Now, these are structures in our brain that are responsible for, well, you guessed it, processing language. So we have many different language centers, as you can see, but the main ones that you really need to know are Broca's area and Wernicke's area. I've added the angular gyrus just for fun, once again. A little bit of extra information can't hurt you. Broca's area is responsible for speech production and articulation. So, let's say, for example, I ask you a simple question. Let's see, what should I ask you? What's your favorite food? Now, my favorite food is curry rice. So, let's say I ask you that question and your answer is, my favorite food is curry rice. Now, obviously, for you being able to communicate that across back to me, that involves the Broca's area. The Broca's area is at play here in being able to translate your thought into an actual spoken sentence. The second structure here is Wernicke's area. Now, this structure is responsible for language comprehension. So, in going back in that example I provided earlier, me asking you a question, what's your favorite food? The role of Wernicke's area in that regard is you being able to understand what I am trying to ask you. By having a Wernicke's area, you're able to process what I'm trying to ask from you. Without having a Wernicke's area, me asking you the question, what's your favorite food, it wouldn't have any meaning. You're gonna hear the words, they're gonna go through your ear, but it's almost like they just come out the other ear because your brain does not have the capacity to process, to comprehend what that sentence means. And lastly, I have added here, you don't have to know this, but we have the angular gyrus, which is also an important component in the brain. It is responsible for more complex language functions, so the understanding of semantics and how sentences are structured, and it's a lot more complex compared to the Broca's area and Wernicke's area. It's responsible for a lot of things, but mainly semantics, as I have mentioned. Another thing that the angular gyrus is responsible for, which isn't a part of the language pathway, but have you heard of theory of mind? The angular gyrus is responsible for theory of mind. It's basically the ability to be able to put yourself in someone else's shoes. It's a quality that's lacking in many individuals that have ASD or autism spectrum disorder. So yeah, just a little fun fact for you. Let's summarize what we've learned in the slide here. Alright, let's think of this as a machine, okay? You have the input, then the processing, and then the output. Let's have an actual visualization, an illustrated example, shall we? Something simple. Let's say example scenario will be reading a book out loud. You guys have done that before in middle school. So the input in this scenario, and by the way, I just want to mention that this is just a quick little diagram to help everyone visualize. This is not an actual concept or anything in psychology. Just a disclaimer. So don't come at me, okay? It's just a little visualization to help people understand better. Let's say your input is reading the book in your mind, basically. You know, before you have to read something out loud, you're gonna have to read it in your mind. Maybe I should use a different color for that. Oh man, I should. Alrighty, give me a second here. Reading the book in your mind. Alright, reading the book, input. And your output would be saying the words, since you're reading them out loud, saying the words out loud. Alright. Now, what goes on in the processing stage here? In the processing stage, as we've discussed previously, this involves the functioning of those language centers in your brain. So, let's see, what do we have here? Processing. We have the angular gyrus and the Wernicke's area and the Broca's area. What the angular gyrus does after having the input of you reading the book, you know, the words are going into your mind, and carries out its function of processing words and understanding semantics of what you've read. And let's see what the Wernicke's area does. The Wernicke's area, if you remember, it allows for the comprehension of what you've read. So the comprehension of language, or essentially what you've read, the sentences you've read from the book. And last of all, I'd say that the Broca's area is the most distinct in its function compared to the angular gyrus and the Wernicke's area. That was a struggle moment right there. Because what the Broca's area is more focused on is speech articulation. So you being able to say the words out, that is what the Broca's area is most concerned about. So do not mix up the Wernicke's area and the Broca's area. I know they're both areas, but their functions are pretty different. One is about you saying the words out, and the other one is about articulating the thought itself. Alright, so once we figured out what goes on in processing, it ends here at the Broca's area, and then speech articulation. Speech articulation. This means, basically, you're able to say the words out loud now, because you have formed that thought, you have understood that thought, and now you're able to say that thought out. Hopefully that makes it a little bit more clear. Now let's compare and contrast for a little moment here. The Broca's area and the Wernicke's area. Here's a little geographical map. The Broca's area is located in the frontal lobe of our brain, while the Wernicke's area is located in the temporal lobe of our brain. But the similarity between the two is that they are both located in the left hemisphere of our brain. And can you guess what types of problems may arise when these parts of the brain are damaged? I think I said something about the Wernicke's area in the slide previously. If you could take a little time to think about the possible consequences of, let's say, one day you wake up and your Broca's area is gone. What functions are you unable to carry out now? I'll give you some time to think if you want to. If not, we'll proceed on. Okay, before we get into the actual answers, I'm going to introduce you to this new keyword, aphasia. What is aphasia? What do you think it sounds like? Any of you guys that know etymology can try to figure that out if you don't know that word. So, you see here, I've put there in bold and underlined, aphasia is not aphantasia. And I know these words sound familiar and they are both conditions, but what they're dealing with is completely different from one another. Now, I'll tell you what aphantasia is. Aphantasia is the inability to be able to visualize your thoughts. Now, this is also common in those with ASD, similar to the inability to carry out theory of mind. And right below here, I have put the definition of aphasia. I totally didn't see that earlier. Well, aphasia is the impairment in a person's ability to comprehend or formulate language due to dysfunction in specific brain regions. Now, these specific brain regions obviously is referring to the language centers of the brain, which we have talked about. The Wernicke's area, Broca's area, angular gyrus, etc., etc. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. So now you have a general idea of what may be the consequence of having a damaged Broca's area or a damaged Wernicke's area. Interesting. Let's proceed on. Alrighty, aphasia. Here are the types. Of course, if you're missing your Broca's area, if your Broca's area is damaged, then you have Broca's aphasia, and that is the inability to produce coherent speech. Straightforward, right? And if your Broca's area isn't functioning correctly, then you cannot carry out the function. Duh. Okay, so now you look to my top right and you're probably wondering, why have you put that picture there? Some of you guys may be cringing and some of you guys may be intrigued or so. Well, I hope no one is getting any pleasure from this image. It is pretty disturbing, so I apologize if I kind of gave you a little jump scare when I came to this slide. But anyways, if you don't know what that is what we call a lobotomy. Lobotomies used to be really popular in the 40s or 50s. People believed that it would be a cure for mental disorders, so for example, schizophrenia, etc., etc. Back then, you didn't really have all this research and academia wasn't flourishing like it is now. So, a lot of assumptions are made and people try kind of bizarre and insane methods of trying to cure all these disorders. Well, now we have the knowledge, but back then, it was really, I guess I could say, trial and error. And this was one of the methods. You can see they use this apparatus called the orbitoclast, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. They stick it into your eyeball and they turn it so that it reaches your frontal lobe. And the reason why I've put this image here is not because I just wanted to scare all of you, but Broca's aphasia can actually be a result or a sort of side effect from a lobotomy because, you're messing with your frontal lobe and the Broca's area is located in your frontal lobe. Okay, just a little fun fact for you. Well, I don't know if it's fun, but it's definitely a fact. Alright, the next type of aphasia you must know is Wernicke's aphasia. Now, this might sound a bit contradictory, but it's when you're fluent in speaking, but the word choice and the language basically that you use in your speaking is limited. So this might not make a lot of sense right now, but I have an example in the next slide, so hopefully that can clear things up. I feel like it's pretty helpful. And I'm so sorry for that. Lastly, we have dyslexia, which is something I added just for extra knowledge because once again, a little bit of extra knowledge has never killed anyone. There are two main types of dyslexia. First, you have dysedetic. Hopefully I didn't butcher it, but I might have. So people with this type of dyslexia may not be able to identify or, recognize some words. So for example, let's say the word laugh, Laugh. When you say laugh, they understand. Okay, well, laugh. It means when you go ha ha ha, right? So, but let's say they're reading and they come across this word Laugh on paper. They might not recognize it as the word laugh because to them, when you talk to them and you say the word laugh, they think of it in their mind as like Lag or what? LAF. So when they actually come across this word in writing, they will not recognize this as the word laugh. The second type of dyslexia we have is dysphonetic dyslexia. This deals with a dysfunction in the Wernicke's area, and this condition is a lot more straightforward, I'd say, compared to the first type. And it's when you're unable to sound out unknown words. So this has a lot to do with sort of not understanding phonics. So let's say you come across an unknown word. Say the word is elephant. Someone with this type of dyslexia, when they read words, they usually remember by just remembering the word as a whole. They don't really understand phonics. So let's say you come across an unknown word. First thing you try to do, let's say the word is elephant. First thing you try to do is you try to break it apart. Like, oh, elephant. Syllable by syllable, right? But someone with this phonetic dyslexia is unable to do that. So when they see words they're familiar with, it's because they have seen that word so many times that they remember how to pronounce those words. It's not that they use phonics. So when they come across an unusual word like elephant, they don't break it apart syllable by syllable because, they're unable to do that. And that results in them being unable to sound out these unknown words. So hopefully that gives you a bit of information, fun facts once again. Alrighty, here are the examples. So first we have an example from someone with Broca's aphasia. You can see from reading, I'm not going to read it out because that's pretty long, but you can see that they have the general idea. The thought is formulated in their mind, but the problem with their speech is essentially word salad. They do have a picture of what they're saying, their Wernicke's area is working fine, so they're able to comprehend language, but the problem is with expressing this thought. So as you can see, there's a lot of stuttering. The thoughts aren't entirely incoherent, but the way they're trying to express it is just not there. So in Gen Z lingo, you say, you have the idea, but the execution is just flawed. I honestly don't know if that is Gen Z lingo, so I apologize if I butchered that as well. Alrighty. So secondly, we have a sample from someone with Wernicke's aphasia. You can see here what I mentioned. The speech is fluent, as in there are no stutters. They speak like how someone would normally say a sentence. Mother is away here working her work together better. But clearly, you read this and you're like, okay, they seem confident, but is the content making any sense here? You can see it's just a bunch of words strung together. It's like a jumble of random words, but the words don't go together. You know what this reminds me of? This is such a niche example, but if you want to know an example of Wernicke's aphasia or something similar to that, there's this song. I don't remember who the artist is, but it's called Stuff Is Way. You should try to look at the lyrics, maybe. A very niche example, but yeah, I'm just saying. Alright, next is Chomsky's theory, I think I'll leave this for a future video actually. I want this one to be pretty short and simple so that we can all digest. That's it for today's video. I'll be going through Chomsky's theory in the next one because I don't want to drag this one out for so long. If you have any questions, concerns, or you just want to talk, here's my email on screen right here. Or if you want to drop any requests for video ideas, you can also do so in the comments. I will read your comments, don't worry. Anyways, that's it. Goodbye everyone, and good luck on your studies. Be a good kid, trust me.